What's up here? Wanted to jump in because breaking news. Fired up the old Twitter or X or whatever you want to call it, and landed on the most unfortunate but probably not unexpected news of the day, and that comes from Mark Rubin of also known as Pixels of Mark, who is the head of the Xdefiant team over at Ubisoft, and unfortunately he's here today to let us know that Xdefiant is shutting down in June, which is really unfortunate. To be honest, like that's it's unfortunate. It's not unexpected, but it's unfortunate. Um, Xdefiant is one of those shooter games that had a lot of promise and a lot of anticipation behind it. There were a lot of things that they were doing right. Their maps were fantastic. Um, they had a lot of assets to draw on. But as I'd mentioned earlier, this has been what 2 years now since it really hit that first public beta, and it has struggled in the ways that matter most for a multiplayer game. Um, Least of which is that it was a multiplayer game, like a 6v6 classic arcade shooter. And the reality is, it if you're going to launch a 6v6 arcade shooter, it has to be like you are competing with Call of Duty, as bad as Call of Duty can be at times. And when this was first announced, it was in the middle of MW2, and it was, you know, it had the potential to grab a lot of COD's audience away because the mechanics were better. And unfortunately, it felt like a very missed opportunity that it delayed for about a year before it finally launched around the window of MW3. And to be honest, that was probably the biggest mistake that I can see, because even though they had a lot of technical problems and there's a lot going on, there's a lot reported on the back end that was definitely not flattering for the leadership team. And kind of given how some of these problems persisted, I think there's some credibility to the rumors and leaks that came out, despite Mark's statements otherwise. Um, and I think all of those things together, at the end of the day, the project felt a little doomed from the start. And it isn't necessarily because it was a bad product. I think it was poorly timed to compete with COD when it was at its lowest. Um, and the delay that they took, the however long it was, definitely hurt them a lot. And then the ongoing netcode issues. They had a lot of problems. Kind of getting the game to function at a basic level, the way that an arena shooter multiplayer game should function, right? Like it can't have you can't have those. You can't go toe to toe against Call of Duty and get away with the same problems that Call of Duty has now. I mean, Call of Duty is suffering from netcode issues right now in Warzone, and it people are furious. Um, but there's a long standing, loyalty that they're banking on, and people will, come back when it's fixed. Unfortunately, if you're a new title, you don't have that luxury. You don't have people who have played the game for years, that will sit through the bad parts. It has to be right when it launches, or it has to launch in a state that everybody understands is going to get better over time. You can't delay a year and then go toe to toe against Call of Duty, one of their a highlight year for them, which was the MW3 era, um and expect to win. And then the other thing that they ran into is they didn't have any ambitions beyond 6v6. It was a straight multiplayer shooter, which is fine, but those do not that style of game just does not hold an audience the way it used to, right? There was a long period of time in which people, the 6v6 arcade Call of Duty multiplayer um style of gameplay was the game. That was what shooters were, and everybody wanted to do it better. Um and that time is kind of past, right? And I said this before, is that you can't go toe to toe against Call of Duty. And if you are launching a 6v6 multiplayer, you are toe to toe against Call of Duty without a lot more content than just multiplayer. And I think, I think if there's something that gets put on the obituary above the fold for Xdefiant, it's that it wasn't ambitious enough. A lot of folks really appreciated the lack of skill-based matchmaking, and the negative effects of that, but it has shown to not necessarily be a selling point, I think, on its own, that there has to be something more. And the one thing Call of Duty does exceptionally well, whether you like it or not, is produce content. They give you modes, maps, cosmetics, new weapons, almost monthly. In fact, sometimes weekly. You have events, you have collabs, you have all sorts of stuff going on in Call of Duty at any given time. And we don't see we didn't see much of that with Xdefiant. And we've seen that with some other games too. There have been other launches that have come up and they run into the same problem of they put out a product that is very viable and should be competitive, but they don't have the pipeline of content to keep people interested over the long term, right? So the first month or two is great. Everyone will enjoy the game, but the grind, the reason to play and the things that make people invested in the game, i.e., that cost them money, needs to show. It needs to be worth it. It needs to be ongoing. And there has to be some, there has to be modes beyond simple 6v6, because we as gamers collectively seem to be not as excited about that as we used to be. And I think that is something that played heavily into, what ultimately is the downfall of Xdefiant. And it is, to be honest, across the sphere, it is unfortunate, because I feel like Xdefiant had a lot of elements going in their favor. They had great maps. They were bright and colorful. I will say that they looked good. There was a strong art direction. They had a lot of resources to pull from, and, a lot of assets on the creative side. All of Ubisoft's products they could have pulled from. So they had a lot going for them, but there was not an investment beyond simply beyond this arcade shooter, which, is a good foundation for stuff, but it's not what holds it anymore. Like there is no draw to that beyond hop on here and there and play. Yeah, and it's unfortunate, but as many have said, it needs a BR. It needed a BR. It needed zombies. It needed something, an extraction mode. And I think, if you look at like Delta Force, that upcoming release has got a very strong extraction mode, and it has, a Battlefield style multiplayer mode. And there's something there for everybody, right? And when you are tired of one mode, there's another mode. You don't have to find another game. And that's the problem with Xdefiant, is that there's just one mode. And when you're tired of it, there's nowhere else to go. You have to switch games. And that's something that COD does better than anybody right now. They have a mode for everybody. Warzone, arcade shooter, zombies, extraction. Heck, even some of the LTMs are fun. You've also, and then they've got the party modes, right? Right now, Prop Hunt is probably the best mode in Call of Duty. And that is a mode that is ideal for sitting around and drinking beers with the bros while you play. Call of Duty's got it for everybody. And Xdefiant couldn't figure that out in time. And that is something I think that the next game that comes along needs to really take into consideration. That you can't be a one-trick pony in this space, because Call of Duty is bigger, and they're probably going to do it better than you, whether you like that or not. So you have to beat them at their own game, which is to be something to everybody. So those are my thoughts on reading this. R.I.P. Xdefiant. I hope the fans of it find somewhere to land that they can enjoy playing. I hope the staff and whatnot, they they get shuffled over to the next project. And by between now and June. So hopefully all's well that ends well. But otherwise, rest in peace, X Defiant. And I'll catch you on the next one.